I never told anyone about the Tuesday morning ritual. Every week at exactly 6:47 a.m., while the rest of Vanier slept and the garbage trucks hadn't yet started their routes, I'd sit cross-legged on my bed with my laptop balanced on a pillow and log into the private banking portal. The password was 32 characters long. Only 7 people at the Royal Bank's executive tier knew the account existed, and I was fairly certain none of them had ever met me in person. The balance this morning read $14,200,000 in liquid assets. Another $31,000 sat in the irrevocable trust Daniel had established 3 years before the accident. The one with my name on it in a way that made it untouchable by anyone else. The waterfront property in Rockcliffe Park showed on a separate screen. The title still in my maiden name. Rousseau. Not Mitchell. Never Mitchell, even though that's what everyone called me now. I watched the numbers on the screen, letting them sit there in the pre-dawn darkness. Sometimes I'd refresh the page just to see them appear again, to confirm they were real. That this whole elaborate performance I'd been living for the past 18 months wasn't just some fever dream, some manifestation of grief so profound it had detached me from reality entirely. But no, the numbers stayed the same. The accounts remained untouched. The wealth Daniel and I had built together sat there, patient and silent, waiting for me to decide what to do with it. Every Tuesday morning I performed this same ritual, a weekly reminder to myself of who I actually was beneath the costume I wore for everyone else. It was like checking my pulse, making sure I was still alive under all the layers of pretense. I closed the laptop and walked the 6 steps from my bed to the kitchenette. The apartment was 412 square feet. I'd measured it myself the day I moved in, pacing it out like I was surveying a crime scene. One room that served as bedroom, living room, and dining room. A kitchen so small I could touch the fridge and the stove at the same time if I stood in the center and stretched my arms out. A bathroom where the shower curtain brushed against the toilet. This place cost me $350 a month. I could have bought the entire building without making a dent in my accounts. The walls were thin enough that I could hear my neighbor's alarm clock go off every morning at 6:30. I could hear the couple upstairs arguing about whose turn it was to take out the trash. I could hear the television from the apartment below, always tuned to the same morning news program, the anchor's cheerful voices bleeding through the floor. I'd chosen this place deliberately, not just for the optics, though that was certainly part of it, but because I needed to remember what it felt like to live without the cushion of wealth, to understand viscerally what it meant to count dollars and worry about bills. Daniel and I had started with nothing. We'd built our company from a 1-bedroom apartment not much bigger than this one, eating ramen and working 18-hour days, and believing that if we just worked hard enough, smart enough, we could build something that mattered. Somewhere along the way, we'd forgotten what that felt like. The money had come, and with it, a certain insulation from the real world. This apartment was my reminder. Every morning when I woke up and saw these 4 walls, I remembered where I'd come from, who I'd been before the money, who I still was, underneath everything else. Instead, I made instant coffee in a mug that said, "World's Best Teacher," though I'd never taught a day in my life. I'd found it at Goodwill for $1.50. Lisa, my mother-in-law, had been with me that day. She'd nodded approvingly when I picked it up, said something about how it was good that I was being practical about my situation. I remembered the way she'd said situation. Not tragedy, not loss. Situation. Like my husband dying was a circumstance I'd found myself in, something to be managed rather than mourned. I'd smiled at her and thanked her for taking me shopping, for helping me find affordable things to fill my new life with. Inside, something had gone very still and very cold. The transformation took exactly 11 minutes. I'd timed it once, curious about how long it took to become a different person. The designer jeans Daniel bought me in Montreal went into the back of the closet, folded carefully so they wouldn't crease. The Cartier watch he'd given me for our 2nd anniversary, the one with the Roman numerals and the sapphire crown, went into its box, and then into the lockbox I kept under the bed. In its place, I strapped on a Timex I'd bought at Walmart for $39.99. The second hand ticked so loudly you could hear it across the room. Each item I removed felt like shedding skin. The silk blouse that cost more than most people's weekly groceries. The leather boots from Italy that fit like they'd been made for my feet specifically, because they had been. The delicate gold necklace Daniel had surprised me with on our 3rd anniversary. The one with the tiny diamond that caught light and threw rainbows across whatever room I was in. All of it went away. All of it disappeared into the closet or the lockbox, hidden like evidence of a crime. In their place, I put on clothes from Target. A sweater that pilled at the elbows because I'd deliberately washed it in hot water too many times. Jeans that were just slightly too big. Bought from the clearance rack because that's what struggling widows did. They shopped clearance racks. They bought things that were almost right but not quite. They made do. I pulled my hair into a messy bun. Not the artful kind you see in magazines, the kind that takes 20 minutes and 17 bobby pins to achieve casual perfection. This was the kind that said I'd given up, that I'd stopped caring what I looked like because what was the point when your husband was dead and your life was over? I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror, studying the transformation. My face was the same, my eyes were the same, but everything else screamed different person. Someone smaller, someone less, someone who needed help. Lisa had told me once that the bun made me look appropriately grief-stricken. She'd said it like it was a compliment, like I'd achieved something worth celebrating by looking sufficiently devastated. I'd thanked her for noticing, my voice soft and grateful. Inside, I'd added it to the mental file I was keeping on all of them. By 7:03 a.m., Catherine Mitchell stared back at me from the bathroom mirror. Not Catherine Rousseau, the woman who'd co-founded a software security company that was currently worth $140 million, not the woman who'd negotiated contracts with 3 Fortune 500 companies before she turned 30. Not the woman who owned property that made her wealthier than everyone she knew combined. Just Catherine Mitchell, the struggling widow, the woman who needed help, the daughter-in-law who should be grateful. My phone buzzed against the bathroom counter. A text from Lisa lit up the screen. Family dinner tonight. 6 p.m. Don't be late. We're discussing something important about Daniel's estate. I read it twice, parsing the subtext the way I'd learned to do over the last 18 months. Don't be late meant I'd better not inconvenience them. Something important meant they'd made a decision without me. Daniel's estate was the punchline, because they genuinely believed there was an estate to discuss, that Daniel had left something behind worth dividing up. I typed back immediately, my thumbs moving fast across the screen. Of course. Thank you so much for including me. Can I bring anything? The eagerness was calculated, every word chosen for maximum effect. For 18 months, since Daniel's car had gone off the Champlain Bridge into the Ottawa River, I'd been playing this role with the precision of a method actor who'd lost themselves in the part. I thanked them for everything. When Lisa gave me Daniel's old winter coat because, as she'd put it, I probably needed it more than goodwill does, I'd hugged her with real tears in my eyes. When Marcus offered me shifts answering phones at his car dealership for $16 an hour, I'd told him with a trembling voice that he was saving my life. When they'd sold Daniel's boat, the 32-foot sailboat he'd bought with money from the company we'd built together, the one we'd named Cypher after our first major client, and they hadn't offered me a single cent from the $47 sale, I'd said I understood, that they needed it more than I did, that I was just grateful to be part of the family. The boat had been Daniel's pride. He'd learned to sail specifically to justify buying it, taking lessons every Saturday morning for 6 months until he could handle her in any weather. We'd spent weekends on the water, just the two of us, away from phones and emails and the constant demands of running a company. Those had been some of our best moments, some of our happiest. Marcus had sold it 3 months after the funeral, hadn't asked if I wanted it, hadn't offered to let me say goodbye. Just sold it to some guy from Gatineau and pocketed the money. When I'd found out, weeks later, in a casual conversation where Amanda mentioned it like it was common knowledge, I'd felt something crack inside my chest. But I'd smiled. I'd nodded. I'd said I understood completely that Marcus probably needed the money more than I needed the memories. Amanda had looked relieved, like she'd been worried I might make a scene. You would think someone might have asked questions. You would think Marcus, who'd borrowed $250 from Daniel 5 years ago to keep his car dealership from going bankrupt, might wonder why I wasn't demanding he pay it back. You would think Lisa, who'd needed $120,000 for a down payment on her house in Kanata when their mother needed full-time care, might be curious about why I never mentioned the money. But grief makes people stupid, and greed makes them blind. They saw what they wanted to see. A widow who'd been left with nothing. A woman who needed their charity. Someone beneath them. The thing about playing powerless is that people show you exactly who they are. They stop performing. They stop pretending. The mask comes off, and what's underneath is often uglier than you ever imagined. That afternoon, I took the number 12 bus to Westboro for my shift at Marcus's dealership. The bus was crowded, smelling like wet winter coats, and the particular desperation of people who couldn't afford cars in a city built for them. A woman with 2 small children stood near the back, struggling with shopping bags and a stroller. Nobody offered to help. I stood the entire ride, even though there were empty seats, because Catherine Mitchell was the kind of woman who gave up her seat, who made herself smaller to accommodate everyone else. The bus lurched through downtown Ottawa, stopping every few blocks to let people on and off. Each stop brought a blast of cold air that cut through my thin jacket, the one I'd bought specifically because it wasn't warm enough. Because struggling widows couldn't afford good winter coats. They made do with what they had. I watched the city pass by through windows fogged with breath and body heat. We rolled past the Rideau Centre, past the Parliament buildings, past all the landmarks that made Ottawa what it was. Tourists took photos. Business people hurried along sidewalks with their heads down against the wind. Life continued, indifferent to anyone's personal tragedy. A teenage boy got on at Lyon Station, his phone blaring music through tinny speakers. No one said anything. No one asked him to turn it down. This was public transit. This was what you endured when you couldn't afford other options. The sound mixed with a baby crying 3 rows back and someone's hacking cough, and the general white noise of too many people in too small a space. I'd taken this same bus every day for 18 months. I knew every stop. I knew which drivers were friendly and which ones treated passengers like cargo. I knew that the bus ran 7 minutes late on Tuesdays, and that if you sat in the back left seat, there was a mysterious stain on the floor that no amount of cleaning ever removed. Daniel and I had 3 cars when he died. Well, when he supposedly died. A Tesla Model S, a BMW sedan for when we needed to look corporate, and a vintage Porsche 911 he'd restored himself over 2 years, working on it in our garage on Sundays, emerging with grease-stained hands and a smile that made everything worth it. All of them gone now, sold by his family, the money distributed among themselves. The dealership was called Mitchell Motors, though it should have been called Mitchell and Rousseau Motors, or more accurately, the place that would have gone under if Daniel hadn't written a $250,000 check. But nobody knew that except me and Marcus had apparently forgotten. He was in his office when I arrived, visible through the glass walls he'd had installed last year. The renovation had cost $83,000. I knew because I'd seen the invoice on his desk once when I was filing paperwork. He was with a client, a man in an expensive suit who was looking at the luxury models on the lot. I watched Marcus laugh at something the man said, watched him shake hands with both of his, watched him gesture toward the espresso machine in the corner like he was offering a fellow member of an exclusive club. The espresso machine was a La Marzocco, commercial grade, the same kind high-end coffee shops used. It cost $12,000. Marcus had bought it 6 months ago, said it helped close deals. That client's appreciated quality. He made cappuccinos for the people who came in looking at cars worth $60,000 or more. Everyone else got instant coffee from a pot that was probably older than I was. The performance was flawless. Marcus Mitchell, successful businessman. Marcus Mitchell, self-made entrepreneur. Marcus Mitchell, generous brother-in-law who'd given his dead brother's widow a job out of the kindness of his heart. I'd watched him tell that story to a reporter from the Ottawa Citizen who'd done a piece on local businesses last month. How he believed in taking care of family. How he'd given me a job when I had nothing. How it was the right thing to do. The article had described him as a pillar of the community, a man who embodied Ottawa values. They hadn't mentioned the $250,000. The article hadn't said anything about how Marcus's business had been 3 months from foreclosure when Daniel had saved it. How the loan had been interest-free because Daniel believed family helped family without strings attached. How Marcus had promised to pay it back as soon as he got back on his feet, and then had simply never mentioned it again. 20 minutes later, Marcus emerged from his office. The client was still there, settled in with his espresso, scrolling through financing options on an iPad. Marcus walked past him with a smile, then turned toward the reception desk where I sat. The smile disappeared like someone had flipped a switch. "Catherine, get me the Henderson file. And when you're done with that, the bathroom needs restocking. We're out of paper towels." "No, please." "No, thank you." No acknowledgement of the client I'd just checked in while he was in his meeting, the one I'd offered water and made comfortable and assured that Marcus would be right with him. His voice had that edge it always did when he spoke to me, that particular tone you use with people you consider beneath you. Not quite rude enough to be called out on it, but dismissive enough to make the power dynamic clear. I stood immediately, smoothing down my cheap sweater. "Of course, right away. Do you need anything else?" "Just those 2 things. And Catherine, try to smile more when clients come in. You look miserable." He said it casually, like he was offering helpful advice rather than criticism. Like my expression was the problem, not the fact that he was treating me like domestic help in front of customers. Like I should be grateful he was teaching me how to be better at a job I was overqualified for by about $100 million. "I'll work on that," I said softly. "Thank you for the feedback." He was already walking away, his attention back on the man with the espresso and the iPad. This was the same brother-in-law who'd given a speech at our wedding about how I was Daniel's greatest decision, who'd toasted to our future and told everyone in the room that Daniel had found his equal. Now he spoke to me the way you'd address someone who should be grateful to empty his trash. I remembered that speech. Marcus had been drunk on champagne and sentiment, his face flushed, his tie loosened. He'd talked about how he'd known the moment he met me that I was different, that I was someone who could keep up with Daniel, who could match him step for step, that his brother had finally found someone who made him better. The speech had been touching. Several people had cried. Daniel had squeezed my hand under the table, his fingers warm and solid and real. That version of Marcus seemed like a different person entirely. Or maybe he wasn't. Maybe the real Marcus had always been this one, and the wedding speech had been the performance. Maybe all of them had been performing this whole time, and I was only now seeing the truth of who they actually were. I got him the Henderson file. I restocked the bathroom, counting out the paper towels and making sure the soap dispensers were full. I checked the toilet paper, the hand sanitizer, the air freshener. I made sure everything was perfect because that's what Catherine Mitchell did. She tried hard. She was grateful for every opportunity. She smiled more. I watched him return to his office, all smiles and courtesy for the man in the expensive suit. The man ended up buying a fully loaded Audi A6 for $73,000. I processed the paperwork, verified his information, set up the financing. I'd done this same job dozens of times over the past 18 months. I was good at it. Efficient. I never made mistakes. Marcus gave the client the keys personally, walked him out to the car, showed him all the features. They shook hands. The client drove away in his new Audi, happy with his purchase. Marcus came back inside, checked the commission calculation on his computer, and smiled to himself. He never said thank you for processing the sale, never acknowledged that I'd spent 40 minutes on the phone with the financing company, working out the details of the loan. Never noticed that I'd caught an error in the VIN number that would have delayed the whole transaction by days. I went back to the reception desk and answered phones, took messages, directed calls, made myself useful. By 5:30 p.m., I was standing on the porch of Lisa's house in Kanata, the house Daniel's money had helped buy when their mother's Alzheimer's got bad enough that she needed 24-hour care. Lisa had wanted to keep her at home. The renovations to add a ground-floor bedroom with an accessible bathroom had cost $87,000. Daniel had written the check without hesitation because he'd loved his mother, because family mattered to him. I remembered going with him to tour the renovation plans. Lisa had been so excited, showing us the architect's drawings, explaining how they'd make the doorways wider for a wheelchair, how they'd install a walk-in shower with grab bars, how they'd put in an emergency call system so her mother could summon help if she needed it. Daniel had listened carefully, asked thoughtful questions, and then had said, "Whatever you need. Mom deserves to be comfortable." Lisa had cried and hugged him, had told him he was saving their mother's life, had promised she'd never forget this kindness. Their mother had lived in that room for 14 months before the Alzheimer's took her completely. Lisa had been with her at the end, holding her hand, singing the songs her mother had sung to her when she was small. The funeral had been beautiful, tasteful, expensive. Lisa had never mentioned the $87,000 again. It was like once her mother died, the money had died with her, transformed from a loan into a gift by virtue of grief and time. Lisa answered the door in head-to-toe Lululemon, the kind of outfit that costs more than I supposedly made in a week. Her kitchen renovation was clearly complete. Through the doorway, I could see quartz countertops in a gray-white pattern that probably had a name like Frozen Cascade or Arctic Dream. Custom cabinets in a soft sage green. Pendant lights that looked like something from an interior design magazine. A professional-grade gas range with 6 burners and a griddle. A wine fridge built into the island. A farmhouse sink deep enough to bathe a small dog in. I'd overheard her on the phone with a friend 2 weeks ago, telling her the whole thing had cost $67,000. She'd laughed and said it was worth every penny, that she deserved to have a beautiful space. That life was too short to cook in an outdated kitchen. I'd been filing paperwork at Marcus's dealership when she'd called. She'd dropped by to bring him lunch, had stood in the waiting area talking loudly enough that I couldn't help but overhear. She hadn't acknowledged me once during the entire conversation, even though I was sitting 15 feet away. "Catherine, you're here," she said now, not moving from the doorway. "Wipe your feet. The floors are new." I wiped my feet on the mat, even though they weren't dirty. The bus had dropped me off 3 blocks away and the sidewalks were clear. "Everything looks beautiful, Lisa. You have such incredible taste." I watched something in her face soften slightly, the way it always did when you complimented her. "Well, we've been blessed. Unlike some people, we know how to manage money." The barb landed exactly where she intended. Her voice was sweet, sympathetic even, but the message was clear. You're poor because you made bad choices. We're successful because we're smart. Your situation is your fault. They all thought Daniel had left me nothing because he'd been careless with money, because the business he'd built had somehow evaporated, because he'd died without planning properly for his future. They had no idea that the software company Marcus and Lisa knew nothing about, the one Daniel had been careful to keep separate from his family because he'd understood their relationship with money, was still running. Still profitable. Still mine. I followed her inside, my cheap shoes squeaking slightly on her perfect floors. The house smelled like something expensive baking, some kind of artisan bread or gourmet appetizers. Classical music played softly from speakers I couldn't see, integrated into the walls or ceiling somewhere. Everything was perfect. Everything was designed to impress. The dining room table was set for 5. Lisa, Marcus, their younger sister Amanda, and 2 empty seats. One for me, one for the memory of Daniel that nobody mentioned anymore unless it was to make a point about my situation. The table itself was new, I realized. Dark wood, probably walnut or cherry, modern design with clean lines. 8 chairs upholstered in gray fabric that looked expensive and impractical. A centerpiece of fresh flowers that must have cost $100 at least. White roses and eucalyptus, arranged artfully in a crystal vase. The china was new too. Not the everyday dishes most people used for family dinners. This was the good stuff. Bone china with a delicate gold rim, the kind you bought for special occasions and then never used because you were afraid of breaking it. Except Lisa was using it for a Tuesday night dinner with family. Because she could. Because she deserved nice things. At dinner, Marcus cleared his throat in that way men do when they're about to say something they think is important. Lisa set down her wine glass with deliberate care. Amanda stopped scrolling through her phone, which meant this was serious, because Amanda never stopped scrolling through her phone. Marcus looked at me across the table, his expression carefully arranged into something meant to convey concern. He'd probably practiced it in the mirror. "Catherine, we've been discussing Daniel's estate." His voice had that careful tone people use when they're about to tell you something for your own good. "We know you've been struggling. We've seen how hard it's been for you." I let my face do what they expected. A slight trembling of my lower lip. Eyes that went shiny with gathering tears. Hands that clasped together in my lap like I was trying to hold myself together. "You've all been so kind," I said softly, looking down at my plate. "I don't know what I would have done without you these past 18 months. Lisa leaned forward, her elbows on the table in a way that would have horrified her if anyone else had done it. "That's exactly why we want to help you move forward. We know you've been living in that apartment in Vanier." She said Vanier the way someone might say sewage treatment plant, with barely concealed disgust, with the implication that living there was evidence of poor judgment, of a life gone wrong. "We've talked to a realtor friend of ours, and there's a basement unit available in Barhaven. It's $200 a month, which is less than what you're paying now. We think with your job at Marcus's dealership and maybe some evening shifts at a restaurant, you could manage it comfortably." A basement unit. They wanted me to move to a basement unit in Barhaven and work 2 jobs to afford it. The mental image was so absurd I almost laughed. Me, with my 14 doors $2 million in liquid assets, scraping together rent money while working at a restaurant at night. But Catherine Mitchell didn't laugh. Catherine Mitchell looked grateful for the suggestion. Catherine Mitchell teared up at their kindness. "We're thinking it's time," Marcus added, nodding along like this was a unanimous decision they'd all agreed on. "You can't grieve forever, Catherine. You need to start rebuilding your life. Moving to Barhaven would be a fresh start." He said it like Barhaven was an opportunity, like I should be excited about the prospect of living underground in a suburb 40 minutes from downtown, working 16-hour days to afford rent on a place that probably smelled like mildew and had windows at ankle level. Amanda nodded too, though Amanda hadn't called me once in 18 months, hadn't texted to see how I was doing, hadn't shown up at the apartment to check if I needed anything. But now she was nodding along with this plan to relocate me to a basement unit in Barhaven, like she'd been invested in my well-being all along. "Plus," Lisa added, her voice taking on that tone people use when they're about to deliver what they think is really good news, "the realtor mentioned that the landlord is looking for someone to help with yard work and snow removal. In exchange, he'd knock $200 off the rent. So really, you'd only be paying $1,000 a month if you're willing to put in a few hours of work." They wanted me to shovel snow for a rent discount. They sat there in their expensive clothes, in this expensive house, eating off expensive china, and suggested I trade manual labor for housing. The wine Lisa was drinking cost $60 a bottle. I'd seen the price tag in the kitchen when I'd helped her bring things out. The earrings Amanda was wearing were David Yurman, probably $800. Marcus's watch was a Rolex Submariner, $12, $12 at least, and they wanted me to shovel driveways for $200 off basement rent. I was about to respond, to thank them again in that grateful voice I'd perfected, when my phone buzzed against the table. The sound was loud in the momentary silence. Everyone looked at it. At me. Unknown number. I almost ignored it. The polite thing would have been to ignore it, to turn the phone over and give Lisa and Marcus my full attention while they explained how they were helping me move on with my life. But something made me look. Some instinct I couldn't name. The words on the screen stopped my heart. Your husband didn't die. He's alive. And watching you. The room tilted. My hand must have trembled, must have given something away, because Lisa noticed immediately. Everything all right? I couldn't breathe, couldn't process. Daniel's car had gone off the Champlain Bridge on a Tuesday morning in October, 18 months ago. They'd recovered the vehicle 3 days later, pulled it from the river with specialized equipment while I stood on the bridge with Marcus and Lisa and watched. The body had been. They'd said the body had been in bad shape, that the impact, the water, the time, had all contributed too. The funeral had been closed casket because they'd said there was nothing to see. I'd identified him by his wedding ring. That's all they'd had that was recognizable. His wedding ring, the one I'd put on his finger 5 years earlier, standing under an arch of flowers while everyone we loved watched and cheered. The ring had been damaged, scratched, and dented, but intact. They'd shown it to me in a plastic evidence bag and asked if I recognized it. I'd said yes. Because what else could I say? The ring was his. Even if everything else was gone, destroyed beyond recognition, the ring was Daniel's. That was proof enough. That was all the proof anyone needed. Another text came through. The accident was real. The death was not. Check the Rockcliffe property. Tonight. Come alone. My mind raced through every moment of the last 18 months. The funeral where I'd stood at the front of the church and delivered a eulogy I'd written at 3 a.m, my hands shaking so badly I could barely read my own handwriting. The first month where I'd barely eaten, barely slept, barely functioned. The moment I'd realized I needed to check our accounts, to understand what was left, and found everything still intact, still in my name, still accessible. The Rockcliffe property. The text mentioned the Rockcliffe property. Only 2 people in the world knew about that property. Me and Daniel. We'd bought it 4 years ago under my maiden name, kept it completely separate from everything else. No one in his family had any record of it. No one knew it existed. Daniel had insisted on the secrecy. I'd thought it was excessive at the time, had asked why we needed to hide it. He'd said something about privacy, about keeping some parts of our lives separate from family expectations. I'd agreed because it seemed harmless, because we had enough money that keeping one property secret didn't matter, because I trusted him. If this was some sick joke, if this was someone trying to scam me or hurt me or... But how would they know about Rockcliffe? I stood up. The chair scraped loud against Lisa's new hardwood floors, the sound harsh and discordant. I need to go. What? Catherine, we're not done discussing, Lisa started. I'm sorry. I just remembered something important. I have to go. Thank you for dinner. My voice sounded wrong to my own ears. Too high. Too tight. Like someone was squeezing my throat. Catherine, this is exactly what we're talking about. Marcus's voice had that edge of frustration in it now, like I was a child who wasn't understanding a simple concept. You can't just run off every time something comes up. You need stability. You need to... I was already moving toward the door, my purse in my hand, my coat half on. I'll call you, I said over my shoulder. And then I was outside in the cold November air, my breath coming in gasps that had nothing to do with the temperature. Behind me, I heard Lisa's voice, sharp with irritation. Well, that was rude, after everything we've done for her. The door closed on whatever Marcus said in response. The Uber to Rockcliffe Park cost $43. I watched the amount tick up on my phone screen and didn't care. My hands shook the entire ride. The driver tried to make conversation, asked if I was okay, and I told him I was fine in a voice that made it clear I didn't want to talk. He was young, probably early 20s, with an air freshener shaped like a pine tree hanging from his rearview mirror. His car smelled like fast food and vanilla air freshener and the particular staleness of a vehicle that spent too many hours on the road. He kept glancing at me in the mirror, his eyes worried. "You sure you're okay, miss? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I said again. "Just had some unexpected news." He nodded like he understood, though he clearly didn't. Good news or bad news? I don't know yet. That seemed to satisfy him, or at least convince him that I wasn't going to elaborate. He turned up the radio, some pop station playing top 40 hits, and focused on driving. The city passed by outside my window. We drove through neighborhoods I recognized, past landmarks I'd seen 1,000 times. Everything looked normal. Everything looked exactly as it should. But nothing felt real. It was like I was watching everything through glass, separated from the world by some invisible barrier. The house was dark when we pulled up to the address I'd given him. Exactly as I'd left it the last time I'd checked on it 3 weeks ago, making sure the heat was still running and the pipes weren't frozen and everything was secure. It sat back from the road, hidden behind old-growth trees that made it invisible from the street. The kind of privacy that cost a fortune in a city where everyone wanted waterfront property. But there was a car in the driveway. Daniel's Tesla. The black Model S he'd bought the year before the accident, the one that was supposed to have been held as evidence after the crash, then released to the family, then sold by Marcus for $62,000 that I'd never seen a penny of. The car I'd assumed was gone, owned by someone else, driven by a stranger who had no idea what it had meant to us. It was sitting in the driveway with condensation on the windows like it had been running recently. "This the place?" the driver asked. His voice was uncertain, like he was wondering if he should be worried. "Yes. Thank you." I paid him through the app, added a generous tip because Catherine Rousseau could afford to be generous, and got out. He waited until I was halfway up the driveway before pulling away, his taillights disappearing around the corner. I stood there staring at the Tesla. My legs felt disconnected from my body. The front door of the house was 10 feet away. The car was 5 feet to my right. Everything felt surreal, like I'd stepped into someone else's life and was watching it happen from the outside. The Tesla's license plate was the same. The small dent in the front bumper from where Daniel had misjudged a parking space 2 years ago was still there. The parking sticker from our building downtown was still in the corner of the windshield, faded but visible. This was Daniel's car. Not one that looked like it. Not a similar model. This was his actual car, the one that was supposed to have been sold months ago, which meant either Marcus had lied about selling it, or the front door was unlocked. I knew it should have been locked. I'd locked it myself 3 weeks ago, had checked it twice because that's what you do when you own property worth $2 million. But when I touched the handle, it turned easily. I pushed the door open slowly, half expecting, what? An ambush? A trap? Someone waiting to hurt me? My heart hammered so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely grip the door handle. I stepped inside. Every light in the house came on at once, flooding the space with brightness that made me raise my hand to shield my eyes. The hardwood floors gleamed. The windows overlooking the river reflected the lights back at me. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for the man standing in the living room. Daniel, my husband, alive. He was thinner than I remembered, his face carrying angles it hadn't had before. He'd grown a beard, something he'd always talked about doing but never had because he thought it looked unprofessional in client meetings. He was wearing jeans and a gray sweater I didn't recognize, standing with his hands in his pockets like he was nervous. Like he was afraid of how I'd react. I couldn't speak, couldn't move. My brain was trying to process what my eyes were seeing and failing completely. This was Daniel. This was my husband who I'd buried, who I'd mourned, who I'd grieved for through 18 months of hell. This was impossible. His eyes were the same, that particular shade of brown that looked almost gold in certain light. His hands were the same, long fingers that used to trace patterns on my skin while we talked late into the night. The way he stood was the same, weight slightly forward, like he was always ready to move toward something. But everything else was different. The beard changed the shape of his face. The weight loss made his cheekbones sharp, his jaw more defined. He looked older, harder, like he'd lived several years in the 18 months since I'd last seen him. "Before you say anything," he said quietly, and his voice was exactly the same. Exactly as I remembered it. "Before you say anything, I need to tell you why." The word why seemed inadequate, insufficient. Why didn't cover 18 months of grief? Why didn't explain the funeral, the closed casket, the ring in the evidence bag? Why didn't account for the hours I'd spent staring at the ceiling at 3 a.m, trying to understand how to exist in a world where he didn't? The story came out in pieces, like he'd rehearsed it but couldn't quite remember the order. The business we'd built, the software security company that Marcus and Lisa knew nothing about because we'd kept it carefully separate from family, had caught the attention of people we didn't want attention from, dangerous people who'd seen our security protocols and thought they could repurpose them for things that would have destroyed everything we'd worked for. Drug trafficking, money laundering, corporate espionage. He paced while he talked, moving back and forth across the living room like he couldn't stand still. His hands came out of his pockets, gesturing to emphasize points, then went back in when he ran out of things to do with them. Daniel had gone to the RCMP, then to the federal authorities. They'd listened to everything he had, looked at the evidence he'd compiled, and told him there was a problem. The people interested in our company had connections, resources, a history of eliminating obstacles. They'd offered him witness protection. But witness protection required him to disappear completely. No contact with anyone from his previous life, no phone calls, no emails, no way to let the people he loved know he was alive. "I wanted to tell you," he said, and for the first time, his voice broke. "I fought with them about it for weeks. I told them you deserved to know, that keeping you in the dark was cruel, that you could handle it. But they said if you knew, if you acted differently, if you gave any indication that something was wrong, you'd be in danger too." The accident had been staged, carefully planned. His car had gone into the river, but he hadn't been in it. They'd made sure the damage was catastrophic enough that identification would be difficult. Had counted on the fact that his family would be too grief-stricken to push for extensive investigation. They'd used his wedding ring, had put it in the wreckage, had made sure it would survive the impact and the water, that it would be the one recognizable thing. They'd known I would identify him by it, that the ring would be proof enough. He'd been watching from a distance for 18 months, making sure I was safe. "I wanted to tell you," he said again, and his voice broke in a way I'd only heard once before, the night his mother died. "But they said if you knew, if you acted differently, if you gave any indication that something was wrong, you'd be in danger too. So I watched you mourn me. I watched you at my funeral, standing at the front of that church trying to hold it together. I watched you become someone smaller than who you are, and it killed me every single day. Something hot and sharp rose in my chest. Anger, rage, 18 months of grief transforming instantly into fury. You watched me?" My voice came out louder than I intended. "You watched me grieve and you did nothing?" The words hung in the air between us. All the pain, all the loneliness, all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep thinking I'd never see him again. All the moments I'd reached for my phone to text him something funny, only to remember he was gone. All the times I'd turned to say something and found empty space where he should have been. He'd watched all of it, from somewhere safe, while I'd drowned. I thought about the first month after the accident. The way I'd stopped eating because food tasted like ash in my mouth. The way I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and forget for just a second that he was gone, reach across the bed for him, find nothing but cold sheets. The way I'd worn his shirts to bed because they still smelled like him, until one day they didn't anymore, and I'd cried so hard I'd thrown up. He'd known. He'd watched. He'd let me suffer because some federal agent told him it was necessary. I couldn't, Daniel started, but I cut him off. I couldn't. You watched me at your funeral? You watched me crying at your grave? You watched me. Daniel, I had no choice. His voice was desperate now, pleading. They would have killed you. These people, Catherine, they weren't playing games. They'd already killed 2 people. An engineer in Vancouver and a consultant in Toronto. Both of them had refused to cooperate. Both of them ended up dead in ways that looked like accidents. Your family, I whispered. The words felt thick in my throat. Did you know what they were doing? His jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes. Something that looked like rage. I've seen everything. Every conversation. Every interaction. I've watched them take from you. Disrespect you. Treat you like you should be grateful for their scraps. I've watched you let them, and I couldn't understand why. I couldn't figure out what you were doing until my handler explained it to me. You were documenting everything. He said it like it was something to be proud of. Like my 18 months of performance had been clever rather than necessary. Like I'd chosen this rather than had it forced on me by his death. His fake death. His staged death. I had been documenting. Every loan Daniel had given them that they'd conveniently forgotten about. Every piece of property bought with our money that they'd claimed was their own success. Every text message where Lisa talked down to me. Every moment at Marcus's dealership where he treated me like hired help. Every family dinner where they discussed my future like I wasn't capable of making my own decisions. I'd kept records of all of it. Screenshots, emails, bank transfers, a file on my laptop that grew thicker every week. But I hadn't done it because it was clever. I'd done it because I'd needed to understand who they really were. Because I'd needed to know if they would step up when it mattered. If they would treat someone they thought was powerless with basic kindness. They hadn't. The people we were worried about were arrested 4 days ago, Daniel said. International operation, 16 people in custody across 3 countries. It's over. The threat is gone. I can come back. But first, we need to deal with my family. I looked at him standing in our living room, in the house no one else knew we owned, and something shifted. The grief I'd been carrying for 18 months, the weight of playing powerless, the exhaustion of being someone I wasn't, all of it crystallized into something harder. Clarity. We stood there in silence for a long moment. The house settled around us, the old wood creaking in that way houses do at night. Outside, the river moved in the darkness, constant and unchanging. Inside, everything had changed. How long have you been watching? I finally asked. Since the beginning? Since 3 days after the funeral. They had me in a safe house in Montreal for the first week. Then they moved me to Toronto, then Vancouver. They kept moving me, kept me isolated. But they let me have access to security footage. Lisa's house, Marcus's dealership. I couldn't see you at your apartment, but I could see everywhere else you went. His voice was hollow, haunted, like he'd lived through his own version of hell. So you saw. All of it. Every moment they treated me like I was nothing. Every moment. And I couldn't do anything about it. I wanted to. God, Catherine, I wanted to come back so many times. To tell you the truth. To make them stop. But my handler kept showing me photos of the people they'd killed. Kept reminding me that if I broke protocol, if I gave any indication I was alive, you'd be next. I thought about that. Thought about living in fear for 18 months. Thought about watching someone you love be humiliated and degraded and not being able to intervene. It was its own kind of torture. Different from mine, but no less real. I'm sorry, he said. I know that's not enough. I know 18 months of watching you suffer can't be erased with an apology. But I need you to know that every day, every moment, I wish there was another way. The anger was still there, hot and sharp in my chest. But beneath it, something else. Relief. Joy. The impossible reality that he was alive. That he was here. That we had a chance to rebuild what had been taken from us. Tomorrow, I said. We call a family meeting tomorrow. The next evening, we called a family meeting at Lisa's house. Same dining room where I'd sat 24 hours earlier, listening to them plan my future. Marcus and Lisa and Amanda all arrived expecting another session of managing poor, helpless Catherine, of guiding me toward the life they'd decided I should have. Daniel and I had spent the night talking, really talking, in a way we hadn't been able to do in years. About the business, about his family, about the patterns we'd both seen but never fully acknowledged, about how money changed people, or maybe just revealed who they'd always been. We'd slept for a few hours just before dawn, exhausted, but strangely at peace. When I woke up, I'd reached across the bed expecting empty space and found him instead. Real, solid, alive. I'd stayed there for a long time, just feeling him breathe, confirming he wasn't a dream. Now, driving to Lisa's house in the Tesla that Marcus had supposedly sold, I felt different. Lighter. Like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten it was there, and now it was gone. "Are you ready for this?" Daniel asked as we pulled into the driveway. "I've been ready for 18 months, I said. I arrived with Daniel. You could have heard a pin drop. The silence was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen, could hear someone's watch ticking, could hear the sound of my own breathing. Lisa's wine glass slipped from her hand. It hit the edge of the table, bounced once, then shattered against her new hardwood floor. Red wine spread across the boards she'd just had refinished, seeping into the cracks between them. It looked like blood, like something had been wounded. She didn't move to clean it up. She just stared. Her mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Her face went through a series of expressions too fast to track. Shock, disbelief, fear. Something that might have been hope. Then back to shock again when her brain caught up with what her eyes were showing her. Marcus stood up so fast his chair fell backward, clattering against the wall. His face went through a series of expressions too fast to track. Shock, disbelief, confusion. Something that might have been fear. His hands came up, reaching toward Daniel like he wanted to touch him, to confirm he was real. Then they dropped back to his sides like he'd forgotten what he'd meant to do with them. Amanda's phone dropped from her hand onto the table. The sound was loud in the silence. Her face went completely white, all the color draining out like someone had pulled a plug. She looked like she might faint. One hand gripped the edge of the table, knuckles going white with the pressure. "Hello, family," Daniel said. His voice was cold in a way I'd never heard it before, not in all our years together. Controlled, precise. The voice of someone who'd been watching and waiting and was done with both. "Daniel." Lisa found her voice first, though it came out broken. "Oh my God. Daniel. We thought, the accident. How are you even—" She moved toward him, hands outstretched, tears already streaming down her face. The performance of grief transforming instantly into the performance of joy. Her arms were open, ready to embrace him, to pull him close, to claim him as hers. Daniel stepped back. One clear, deliberate step that put more distance between them. "Don't." The single word hit like a physical blow. Lisa stopped moving. Her arms dropped to her sides. The tears kept coming, but her expression changed. Confusion replaced joy. Hurt replaced relief. "But we thought you were dead." Lisa's voice climbed higher. "We mourned you. We went to your funeral. We've been taking care of Catherine all this time because we thought—" "Taking care of her?" Daniel's voice could have cut glass. Is that what you call paying my wife $16 an hour to answer phones at a dealership she helped fund? Is that what you call selling my boat and keeping the $47,000? Is that what you call suggesting she work evening shifts at a restaurant when she has more money than all of you combined? The silence that followed was different from the first one. This one had weight, texture. You could feel it pressing down on everyone in the room. "What are you talking about?" Lisa whispered. Her eyes went to me, then back to Daniel, then back to me. Like she was trying to understand what was happening. Like the script she'd been following had suddenly changed without warning. I spoke for the first time since we'd arrived. The software company Daniel and I built together is currently valued at $140 million. The trust Daniel established in my name 3 years before the accident holds $31 million. I own property in Rockcliffe Park worth $2 million. I have never needed your help. Not once. Not ever. My voice was steady, calm. I'd practiced this part. I'd known exactly what I was going to say, exactly how I was going to say it. Every word chosen for maximum impact. Amanda's mouth opened and closed. No sound came out. Her phone lit up on the table, someone calling or texting. But she didn't reach for it. She just stood there, frozen, trying to process what she'd just heard. Marcus looked like he might be sick, his face taking on a greenish tint. One hand went to his stomach. The other gripped the edge of the table. "But you said—" Lisa started. "I never said I was poor," I interrupted. "You assumed I was poor. And I let you assume it, because I wanted to see who you really were when you thought I had nothing to offer you." Daniel pulled a folder from inside his jacket. He set it on the table with deliberate care, the sound of paper against wood unnaturally loud. Inside were printouts, bank statements, loan documents, email screenshots, 18 months' worth of evidence, organized chronologically. The $250, zero. Marcus borrowed 7 years ago and never repaid. I have the original loan documents, signed, notarized, the $87,000 for the house renovations when Mom got sick, Lisa. The down payment on this house, $120,000 of our money. The boat you sold and never gave Catherine a dime from. Catherine documented all of it. He spread the papers across the table like a dealer showing cards. Each one told a story. Each one proved a point. "We didn't know," Marcus said. His voice was weak, like he was trying out the defense and knew it wouldn't work. "Daniel, we had no idea you had that kind of money. You never told us. How were we supposed to—" "You didn't ask," I said. "In 18 months of thinking I was a struggling widow, not one of you asked if I needed real help. You offered me table scraps and expected gratitude. Marcus, you watched me take the bus to work every single day in January when it was negative 20 degrees outside because my car had supposedly broken down. You never once offered me a ride. You have 6 cars sitting on your lot right now. Marcus started. "You watched," I said. "You watched me struggle and you did nothing. Because it was easier for you if I was beneath you. Because it justified keeping everything. Because if I needed your help, that made you generous. That made you good people." "You said you were fine," Marcus tried. I said thank you. There's a difference. Lisa was crying now, mascara running down her face in black streaks. Her hands were shaking. She looked smaller somehow, like she was shrinking under the weight of what she was hearing. "Catherine, please, you have to understand. We're family. We made mistakes, but we didn't know. We thought we were helping. We thought, family doesn't treat each other the way you treated my wife." Daniel cut through her words like they weren't even there. "You know what you did? You looked at someone you thought was powerless and you kicked down. You treated her like hired help. You spoke to her in a tone you would never use with anyone you actually respected." "That's not fair," Amanda said. She'd found her voice finally, though it shook. "We were trying to help her move on. We were trying to—" "By telling her to rent a basement apartment in Barhaven?" I asked. "While you 3 were planning to divide up Daniel's estate among yourselves?" I've seen the paperwork, Amanda. I know about the life insurance policy you thought I didn't know about. The $750 $700 you were planning to split next month. The one you were going to tell me didn't exist. There was a policy through Daniel's old employer, one he'd set up years ago when he'd worked briefly at a tech company before we'd started our business. He'd made Marcus, Lisa, and Amanda the beneficiaries because at the time, we hadn't been married yet. After we'd gotten married, after we'd built our own company, he'd forgotten about it. But they hadn't. They'd remembered. And they'd planned to claim it without ever telling me it existed. The color that had come back to Amanda's face drained away again. Her eyes went to Marcus, then to Lisa, looking for someone to contradict me. No one did. Marcus found his defiance somewhere in the wreckage of his shock. So what happens now? You humiliate us? You drag us through court? You destroy our reputations because we tried to help someone we thought needed it? His voice was getting louder, taking on an edge. He pushed back from the table, standing at his full height like physical size might matter in this conversation, like he could intimidate his way out of this. Daniel smiled. There was no warmth in it, no humor, just edges. Here's what happens now. Every dollar you borrowed from us gets repaid, with interest calculated at the prime rate from the date of each loan. Every piece of property purchased with our money gets signed over to Catherine. You have 60 days to make this happen. If you fight this, if you push back in any way, we go public with everything. Every text message where you talked down to Catherine. Every conversation where you treated her like something you scraped off your shoe. Every moment of the last 18 months. I have contacts at the Ottawa Citizen who would love this story. Tech entrepreneur fakes death, returns to find family exploited grieving widow. Can you imagine the headline? He pulled out his phone, opened up a notes app, and started reading. Lisa Mitchell suggests grieving widow take basement apartment while living in $67 renovated kitchen. Marcus Mitchell pays sister-in-law minimum wage while driving new BMW purchased with unpaid family loan. I have dates. I have amounts. I have everything. And if we do what you're asking? Lisa's voice was barely audible now. What then? We pay you back and everything goes back to normal? We pretend none of this happened? Then we never see each other again, I said simply. No holidays, no birthdays, no phone calls, no pretending we're family. You go your way, we go ours. You get to keep whatever dignity you have left. You can't be serious, Marcus said. His voice was loud now, desperate. We're blood. We're family. You can't just... Blood means nothing without respect, Daniel said. He stood up. So did I. You had 18 months to show my wife basic human decency when you thought she was vulnerable. You failed. That wasn't a mistake. That wasn't ignorance. That was a choice. And choices have consequences. We walked toward the door together. Behind us, I could hear Lisa sobbing. The sound was raw, broken. Real grief, maybe. Or just grief at being caught. At losing access to money she'd thought she could keep. Amanda was yelling something about how this wasn't fair, how we were being cruel, how they didn't deserve this. Her voice got higher and higher, bordering on hysterical. You can't do this, Marcus shouted. We'll fight you. We'll contest everything. You'll lose, Daniel said without turning around. And you'll lose publicly. Your choice. The door closed behind us on the sound of their voices. In the car, Daniel reached for my hand. His fingers were warm, solid, real. I'm sorry you had to go through any of this. I'm sorry I put you in a position where you had to... You gave me something important, I said. You gave me clarity. I know exactly who they are now. No doubts. No wondering if I'm being too harsh or too unforgiving. They showed me the truth of who they are when they thought no one was watching. That's a gift. We sat in the car for a moment, the engine ticking as it cooled. Through the windshield, I could see Lisa's house, the lights warm and inviting in the windows. From the outside, it looked perfect. A successful family home, a place where people loved each other. but I knew the truth now. I'd lived it for 18 months. I thought they'd be happy I survived, Daniel said quietly. I thought that when this was over, when I could come back, they'd just be grateful I was alive. But watching them these past months, seeing how they treated you, I don't think they'll be happy at all. I think they'll be angry that the money is going away. Good, I said. Let them be angry. Let them show us one more time exactly who they are. What do you want to do now? I thought about the apartment in Vanier with its 412 square feet and its instant coffee and its second-hand furniture. I thought about the Timex watch and the Goodwill clothes and the performance of poverty I'd been living for 18 months. I want to go home, I said. Our real home. And I never want to pretend to be small again. We drove to Rockcliffe Park, to the house by the water that no one else knew existed. That night, I deleted the 6:47 a.m. alarm I'd been setting for 18 months. I went through the closet and threw out every piece of clothing I'd bought to look appropriately struggling. The jeans from Walmart, the shirts from Value Village, the winter coat Lisa had given me that had belonged to Daniel. All of it went into garbage bags that I set by the door. I opened every curtain in the house, letting the city lights reflect off the river. Letting anyone who cared to look see exactly where I lived and how I lived and who I was. The house felt different now. Or maybe I felt different. The rooms seemed bigger, the ceilings higher, like I'd been carrying something heavy for so long that I'd forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. I walked through each room slowly, relearning the space. The living room with its floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the water. The kitchen with its marble countertops and professional appliances, the ones we'd chosen together 3 years ago. The bedroom with the king-size bed we'd picked out in Montreal, arguing good-naturedly about firmness levels until the salesperson had looked like she wanted to intervene. Everything was exactly as I'd left it 3 weeks ago on my last inspection visit. But it felt different now. Before, this house had been a secret. A place I checked on dutifully, but never really inhabited. Now it was home again. Now it was real. I found Daniel in his study, the room he'd set up when we first bought the house. His desk was still there, his chair, his bookshelves lined with technical manuals and business books. Everything preserved like a museum exhibit of a life interrupted. He was standing by the window looking out at the river. I used to imagine this moment, he said without turning around. Coming back here, being able to walk through these rooms again. I'd dream about it in whatever safe house they had me in that week. But in my dreams, you were always happy to see me. You'd run into my arms and everything would go back to how it was. I never imagined you'd be angry. I'm not angry, I said. Then reconsidered. That's not true. I am angry. I'm furious, but I'm also relieved and happy and confused. I'm feeling about 15 different things at once, and I don't know which one is winning. He turned to face me. That's fair. Give me time, I said. Give me time to process this, to figure out how to feel about 18 months of thinking you were dead, to reconcile the relief of having you back with the anger at what you put me through, even if it wasn't your choice, even if you were trying to protect me. It still happened. I'll give you all the time you need, he said. I owe you that much. Daniel and I sat on the balcony with expensive wine and talked until 3 a.m, about the fear he'd lived with every day in witness protection, about the isolation of watching my life from a distance and being unable to intervene, about the moment he'd watched footage of my performance at his funeral and realized I was stronger than he'd ever imagined. The balcony overlooked the Ottawa River. The water was dark and calm, reflecting the lights from the city. A few boats moved slowly in the distance, their navigation lights blinking red and green. The air was cold, but not uncomfortably so. I'd brought out blankets, wrapped one around my shoulders. You could have told them who you were at any point, he said. The first time Marcus spoke to you like you were beneath him. The first time Lisa made a comment about managing money. Why did you wait? Because I needed to know, I said. I needed to know if they would step up when it mattered. If they would treat someone they thought was powerless with basic kindness. They didn't, and that told me everything I needed to know about who they really are. He was quiet for a long moment. Then, I should have seen it sooner. The way they were with money, the way they always needed something. I wanted to believe they were better than that. People show you who they are, I said. We just have to be willing to see it. 3 weeks later, the first repayment came through. Marcus sent a wire transfer for $8,000 with a note attached. This is wrong. We're family. You're destroying relationships over money. I didn't respond. The note went into the file with everything else. The money came in installments after that. $8,000 every 2 weeks like clockwork. Marcus was making an effort, or at least, he was afraid enough of what would happen if he didn't make an effort that he was following through. Lisa tried calling 14 times in the first month. I watched my phone light up with her name and never answered. On the 15th call, I blocked her number. Each time she called, I felt a little pull. Some old instinct that said answering was the polite thing to do. That family deserved another chance. That forgiveness was what good people did. But I wasn't interested in being good anymore. I was interested in being honest. And the honest truth was that they'd shown me exactly who they were. Anything else would just be performance. Amanda sent a long email. The subject line was, "Please read this." I opened it, read the first line about forgiveness and how I was being cruel, and deleted it. I didn't need to read the rest to know what it would say. Later, curiosity got the better of me and I pulled it out of my trash folder. Read the whole thing. It was exactly what I'd expected. Accusations that I was heartless, that I was destroying the family, that Daniel wouldn't have wanted this, that I was using his return as an excuse to punish them for imagined slights. Imagined slights. As if 18 months of documentation were just my imagination. As if the way they'd treated me had been anything other than exactly what it was. I deleted it again, this time permanently. Daniel and I rebuilt our lives in the open. We started attending the galas and charity events we'd avoided before, the ones where people asked what you did and actually cared about the answer. We invested in 3 new startups, all founded by women who reminded me of who I'd been before I'd learned to make myself smaller. We donated to causes we cared about, our names listed in programs and on websites for everyone to see. The first event we attended was a tech industry gala at the National Arts Center. I wore a dress that cost $3,000 and the Cartier watch Daniel had given me for our 2nd anniversary. I wore my hair down, styled professionally. I wore makeup applied by someone who knew what they were doing. I looked like myself again, like the person I'd been before I'd started playing poor. People asked where I'd been, why they hadn't seen me at events in so long. I told them the truth, or a version of it, that I'd been dealing with a family situation, that things were resolved now, that I was looking forward to reconnecting with the community. No one asked about Daniel being alive after supposedly dying. Either they didn't know about the accident, or they were too polite to mention it. People in that circle had a way of not asking about things that were clearly complicated. I stopped hiding who I was, stopped pretending I needed help I didn't need, stopped making myself less to make other people comfortable. The strangest thing happened. I found real relationships for the first time in years. People who knew exactly who I was from the beginning. No performance, no careful calculation of what to reveal and what to hide. Just truth. Just the actual shape of my life. I met other women who'd built companies, who'd fought for respect in industries that didn't want to give it, who'd learned the hard way that being competent wasn't enough, that you had to be competent and confident and willing to take up space. We traded stories over wine and appetizers at networking events. We became friends. One woman in particular, Sarah, who'd founded a cybersecurity firm, became someone I talked to regularly. She'd been through her own version of professional invisibility, watching men take credit for her work, seeing her ideas dismissed until a male colleague repeated them verbatim. She understood the particular frustration of being capable but unseen, powerful but dismissed. Over coffee one afternoon, I told her a version of my story. Not the whole thing. The witness protection and staged death parts stayed private, but enough. About playing poor to see who would step up. About documenting everything. About finally confronting the people who'd treated me like I was nothing. That must have been satisfying, she said. Finally showing them who you really were. It was, I admitted. But it was also sad, because part of me had hoped they'd prove me wrong. That they'd show up with kindness when I needed it. That they'd be better than they were. She nodded. The hope is the hardest part to let go of. The idea that people might surprise you in a good way instead of confirming your worst suspicions. But they didn't surprise me, I said. They were exactly who I thought they were, and there's a certain peace in that, in knowing the truth. One afternoon, 6 months later, I ran into Lisa at a cafe in the Byward Market. I was meeting a friend for coffee, someone I'd met at a tech industry event who'd invited me to speak on a panel about women in software development. Lisa was coming out as I was going in. She saw me first, started to move toward me, her mouth opening to say something. Then she stopped. Maybe she saw something different in how I carried myself. Maybe she noticed the clothes I was wearing, the confidence I wasn't hiding anymore. Maybe she just realized that the woman who'd thanked her for table scraps wasn't coming back. She looked older, tired. There were lines around her mouth that hadn't been there before, or maybe they'd been there all along and I just hadn't noticed. She was carrying shopping bags from expensive stores, still spending money on things meant to impress people, still performing wealth. She turned and walked away without saying a word. I watched her go, felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no satisfaction, just nothing. She was a stranger now, someone I used to know, someone who'd shown me exactly who she was when it mattered. I finished my coffee meeting and went home, to the house Daniel and I had bought together, to the life we were building that had room for truth in it. And I never pretended to be small again. The research is clear on this, though most people don't want to hear it. A study from the University of Minnesota followed families through major life transitions and found that financial stress doesn't reveal character. It exposes what was always there. When resources are abundant, people can afford to be generous with their kindness. When they perceive scarcity, even if that scarcity is manufactured or imagined, the masks come off. What I learned over those 18 months wasn't really about money. It was about power. About how people treat those they perceive as having less of it. About the difference between performative kindness and actual respect. Real family doesn't require you to be powerless to care about you. Real relationships don't evaporate when you stop being useful. The people worth keeping in your life are the ones who show up with the same energy, whether you're at your highest point or your lowest. Marcus paid off the entire loan within 8 months. Not the required 60 days, but faster than I'd expected. The final payment came with no note, just a wire transfer with a reference number. $250 plus $48 in calculated interest. Then nothing. No follow-up, no attempt at reconciliation. I heard through mutual acquaintances that his dealership was struggling, that he'd had to take out a business loan to cover the payments, that he'd sold his BMW and was driving something more modest. I felt no guilt about it. He'd borrowed that money 7 years ago. Paying it back wasn't punishment. It was what he'd agreed to do. Lisa eventually sold her house, downsized to a townhouse in Stittsville. Somewhere smaller, more affordable. I heard about it from a real estate agent we both knew, who mentioned it in passing at an industry event. The kitchen renovation, the new floors, all of it gone. Sold to cover debts she'd accumulated trying to maintain a lifestyle she couldn't actually afford. Amanda moved to Vancouver, got a job working for a tech company, ironically. I saw her LinkedIn profile once when someone I knew commented on one of her posts. She looked happy in her profile picture, smiling, confident. Maybe the distance had been good for her. Maybe getting away from Marcus and Lisa had let her become someone different. Or maybe she was just performing again. It was hard to tell with Amanda. She'd always been good at showing people what they wanted to see. That's not a lesson anyone wants to learn the hard way. But it's one worth knowing. Daniel and I rebuilt our company, took it in new directions, hired people who shared our vision, made it into something bigger than we'd originally imagined. The threat that had forced him into hiding was gone. But the experience had changed both of us, made us more careful about who we trusted, more intentional about what we built and why. We were better for it, I think. Stronger, more honest with ourselves and each other. Years later, I still thought about that Tuesday morning ritual sometimes. The 6:47 a.m. alarm that had been my weekly reminder of who I really was beneath the costume. I didn't need it anymore. I knew who I was now without having to check, without having to prove anything to myself or anyone else. But I understood why I'd needed it then, why I'd clung to it like a lifeline. Sometimes you need something to hold on to when everything else feels like it's slipping away. Sometimes you need to remind yourself that you're more than what other people see when they look at you. The truth is, we're all performing to some degree, all showing the world a version of ourselves that we think they want to see. The question is whether we're performing to protect ourselves or to deceive others, whether we're being strategic or just being dishonest. I'd been strategic. I'd protected myself while gathering information I needed, and when the time came, I'd used that information to establish boundaries that should have existed all along. That's not cruelty. That's not revenge. That's just refusing to let people treat you badly because it's convenient for them. If you found something valuable in this story, hit that like button. Drop a comment and let me know what you would have done in Catherine's position. Would you have revealed the truth earlier, or let them show themselves completely? Subscribe if you haven't already, because these stories matter, and they're not stopping. And tell me, where are you watching from, and what time is it where you are? I love seeing how far these stories travel. The next video is already up on your screen. It's about a woman who discovered her sister had been stealing her identity for 7 years. What she did about it will leave you speechless. Watch it now.